When we see depth, we call that love. Sometimes we see our own love mirrored back to us in another human being. Sometimes we're allowed to see the potential of someone before it's even realized in this world. That's called believing in someone. So labor and the expression of worth is about asking these questions that help us to align our labor with our deepest worth. I'm here at Audubon Park, first thing this morning, great intent and with gratefulness. It's foggy. I've been out here several days. Haven't really had the heart to record a whole lot out here. It's been windy for one thing, so recording music is not much of a thing. But I've made great connections with people. I met Trey, I met Jacob, and really just countless other people on the trail from whom I have received encouragement, both men and women, generally of athletic type, I guess. Yes, runners, it seems like. Just kind of holding up fists and saying, yeah, and just encouragement from strong young men and young women. And that's good to see that that thing we call the generation gap being bridged there. There's a great focus and a great devotion in my practice right now, and I think that comes through. Here's a question that I think is pertinent. What is required of me? Other questions attached to that question: who is me? And who is doing the requiring? Right? Because when we look there, then we decide whether that question is going to be social or personal or non-personal. The social being, what does my community require of me? What does the system that I was born into require of me to be a part of it? Then there's this question that might be personal, like what do I require of myself? What are my own expectations of me? This one who judges whether things are good enough and who judges oneself as to whether you are measuring up to those self-imposed standards. These standards are often the unconscious ones that are taught to us by the culture that we're born into. And so there's a lot of work to try to get in there and understand where the wisdom is in these requirements. And then there is the non-personal. What does God require of me? Or what is at the truest, at the core of this being? How do I answer the calling? What does it mean to be true to the deepest of self? Many of us still consider God to be of the external, a being outside of us, a separate being. It is my understanding that that is the source of suffering, is that somehow we separated ourselves from the true nature. And this, as I have come to understand, is the nature of the Christ message. You are not alone. You are not separate from God. I have come to show you. I have come to remind you of who you truly are. It is still the case that I pray to God as if God were outside of me. Oh God, help this poor man. Help this man who's suffering. And then at some point, the man's prayers change to God help us, because the man has become educated enough to see that he is not the only one suffering, right? That what he suffers from is actually the sickness of the entire planet, of the entire species, right? So this idea that God is not outside of us, but inside of us, is a metaphysical construct that we use. We use these words to remind us of something. I'm not trying to get you to join a religion or believe what I say. You can take what works for you, and you can leave the rest at any point. As our spiritual beliefs or spiritual language, as our metaphysical constructs align themselves close to the center, we find ourselves not in need of convincing anyone of anything, yet still with a profound and worthy message to carry. It seems to be a correct statement that our species right now is manifesting itself much like a virus on this planet, that we are unconsciously consuming, without any regard for life, the resources of this planet. Is that understandable? Yes, it is. If we look with the perspective of deep time, if we're talking about a linear story constructed in this world, is that understandable considering our rise from consciousness, our rise to consciousness, our realization of the consciousness in our minds? Yes, that is understandable. Is it acceptable? Yes, it is also acceptable. As it is understandable, it is also acceptable. And then also we realize as teachers, as awakened ones, that we are to bring another option to the table. When we live from the automated self, or the unconscious self, we inevitably behave like a sickness. We manifest only that part of our nature which is consumptive. In part, this is why it terrified us so deeply to consider Darwin's assumption that we all evolved from one origin. My point being that we were terrified at even the possibility of considering ourselves part of the animal kingdom. We had already separated ourselves in our minds from nature. I am also not suggesting that many of the current understandings of what we call Darwinism are some kind of answer, right? There are renowned scientists at this point saying, the mathematics of this type of natural selection that we've understood, we don't really have enough time there's not been enough time for it to just kind of randomly occur like we have liked to imagine, like the nihilist, absolute materialist physicists insist that it must have. They come in their territory. Back to the original question. What is required of me? Culturally, it seems that one of the major requirements is that we do paid work or somehow manifest ourselves as an entrepreneur who is capable of generating revenue, people value what that entrepreneur has brought into the world and on such a level that they're willing to part with their money for their service or their goods. What is required of me? Paid work, some kind of paid work. That is because we have made currency the currency. Because currency defines currency in our world, we must participate in that on some level, it seems, unless you are willing to and capable of going out into the wilderness and somehow supporting yourself out there. But even that, yes, it's not really an option for me. I was not educated. I don't have that foundation, that base, right? And you probably don't either. There may be some of us who are more ready for that than others. But even if you are ready for that, finding a place to do that, that's a whole other thing, right? Because all land is owned either by citizens or the government. So to be on that land requires some kind of permission. What is required of me on a personal level now? What does the programmed I, the programmed me, require of me? Well, it's probably a mirror of what I just spoke about the system that we were born into, what it requires of us. Generally, we mirror that. There may be another part of us that somehow struggles against that, but we've generally been conformed to the requirements of our culture. Now, there may come a time in our development when we ask ourselves a deeper question. or the question is posed to us, what does God require of you? Or what does the deepest self require of you? At your core, what does it mean to be true to yourself? Not this whole thing that we do of like, this is just who I am, not that whole thing. I'm talking about past our attitude problems, past our aversions, past our fears. Well, and it is this question of what does God require of me, or what is an authentic answer to my deepest calling. That's what we must overcome, in fact, are the fears and the aversions and all the attitude problems, to really start to get to the bottom of that. What is required of this particular manifestation of consciousness that I call me. And it seems that even for those of us who are in some deeper awakened state, that question must still be answered. That there must be a working out, that the persona must continue to function, that there must be some kind of story told, some kind of hero's journey that is told, a form in which greatness is made manifest, a story that everyone can tell, right? So we have to somehow, see that worked out in the individual still, even after we have come to, we've had these peak experiences of ego dissolution and the rising of what truly is. And these questions may become important as we are pushing ourselves to our limits, as we enter into our wilderness experience, and we are that metal is being tested. And this is the stuff of true philosophy here, asking the deep questions and then analyzing those questions within the context of the self-experience, right? And then also divorcing those questions from the personal experience, and understanding that every time one of these questions is answered in the microcosm, that question is also answered in the macrocosm. The beauty of the question itself is posed to another individual who is now ready to wrestle with that. This question, what is required of me, is directly linked to this labor and the expression of worth study that I'm doing. Labor being our effort, or that which we produce or make, or how we serve in this world, and worth being that depth with which we align ourselves, however shallow or deep that depth may be. We align ourselves with some purpose. We align ourselves with something, and then we begin to labor toward that. Either consciously or unconsciously, this is what we do. So labor and the expression of worth is about asking these questions that help us to align our labor with our deepest worth, with our deepest current understanding of worth. And we cannot allow anyone to define depth for us, because that depth must be discovered in us. Now, we may see that depth in others, and we may respond to that, and we may move toward that depth, and we may say, what's going on here? Can you answer these questions for me? Can you help me to, sometimes there are those of us who have something that others are interested in. When that happens in our life, it may happen, it happens all the time. It's called attraction. You see someone, and when that word attraction is divorced from the romantic idea, we are attracted to that which we are trying to understand and which we're trying to grow into. There's an admiration. We see depth somehow. Sometimes when we see depth, we call that love. Sometimes we see our own love mirrored back to us in another human being. Sometimes we're allowed to see the potential of someone before it's even realized in this world. That's called believing in someone. Ultimately, we must believe in ourselves. This is the last journey, is for the authority to arise from within here. After we've done all the studying, after we've had all the gurus, and we've gone to, all the places that that current status quo has to offer as far as depth experiences, then we must start establishing that depth in ourselves. Community. Generally, there is much alone work to be done in this process, but community is always present. This is how we are as people. We are not the individual. We are this deeper, more communal expression, which is why I like to be at parks.